All right, folks, welcome back for another episode of the Unplanned show. With me today, Arturo Suarez Martin will be talking about how PagerDuty has gone on its own journey with really bridging the gap and the sort of uh, distance between your dev, IT, engineering organizations, and customer service, customer support. And so this is something that we hear a lot about. And I want to get into a little bit of just kind of what those signals are before we get into the real meat of our discussion today. Just a quick heads up on what we have coming up here on the show. Today, we've got Arturo. Next week, I'll be sitting down with Jeff Susna, who's been he's been active in the Agile and DevOps community for a long time. He and I have caught up before, and he's sort of shared some really interesting insights on platform engineering. So invited him to come on the show. That's a hot topic that just keeps coming up again and again and again. Then the following week, we're going to have Todd Whitney on, which feels like kind of timely as we head into the holiday season. He recently gave a talk at HashiConf, and he was talking about handling updates, particularly around how PagerDuty handles updates to what we use from HashiCorp, but doing it with no maintenance windows. So as we head into the time of year with lots of code freezes and whatnot, there's also the thinking about the things that you don't get to freeze on, you don't get to take down. And so thinking about how do you manage that? So really interesting talk. Can't wait to sort of hear him expand on that a little bit. We are going to be pausing for December 25th and January 1st for the holidays, but we will be back in January. We'll have Manu Grudata, who is one of our leaders in our engineering organization here at PagerDuty. And he also recently gave a talk on going from slipping to shipping, which don't say that one 3 times fast if you've been hitting the eggnog, but that seemed like a really interesting topic that I can't wait to hear more about. And of course, just a reminder, we now have these audio versions of these episodes going live on Spotify and Apple Podcasts about every week. So subscribe to those for some interesting listenings if you've missed any of the past episodes. So with that, getting into the talk for today, Arturo, something that, I'd love to get your perspective on, and I've kind of gained an appreciation for, particularly as it's conference and event season, getting out and talking to people, but also just what I see in sort of the internal notes from our teams as they work with customers. And I've kind of come to this conclusion that the phenomenon where issues get through and they aren't caught by monitoring and they're reported by customers, that in every organization, this is a non-zero number. It might be 20% of the time, it might be 90% of the time. And obviously there's probably different things going on if it's 90% of the time than if it's 20% of the time. But no matter what, even if you have things really dialed in well, it's going to be a non-zero number. And so it kind of raises this question of, how do you deal with that? What do you do when you have to accept the reality that all the monitoring and instrumentation that you have is going to miss things? Just, it will. You don't know what it's going to be, and you're going to hear it from your customers.
Yeah, so that is correct. I mean, and when you look at even the sequence of talks that you have prepared for the following weeks, all of those concepts are effectively very new concepts to engineering, right? So as the pace of innovation gets faster and faster, and our ability to catch everything that might come or might happen, might break in a very complex environment, very complex platforms, is just pure unrealistic, right? So at the end of it, we are trying to convince everybody, trying to come to that realization that things will break, right? And it is how you react to those occurrences when things break and are reported by the customers. And again, to your point, what I heard, like the average is 51% of the incidents coming to any organization might be reported by a customer. In our case, we have a little lower rate at PagerDuty, but that doesn't mean that number is not going to change as we progress, right? So how do you react to those occurrences, and what is a process by which you can provide some certainty to the customers on the other side that are expecting you to keep them up to date on what's going on, who's going to be affected, which components are up or down or degraded, how fast are you going to be able to resolve it? That predictability on the communication becomes key to improve that customer experience, right? So we see that as PagerDuty, we do work with engineering organizations on the other side, right? DevOps. So there's this common sense of, it just goes down to a realistic expectation of things being broken, but communication on that process during the incident, during the kind of the resolution phase, but also after the incident is already resolved. How will you be communicating? What are you acting on? What are your lessons learned? So this particular incident doesn't happen again. And that's how we can, through engineering processes, it's nothing to do with tooling, it's just core engineering processes, reviewing all those incidents and being able to circle back to the engineering processes, to the monitoring system, set up the new monitoring, so at least that incident doesn't happen again. That's how you kind of model the percentage of those customer reported issues, right?
Yeah, and I do want to dig into kind of what you're hinting at, which is what are those practices and ways in which organizations reduce the overall sort of trauma, the frequency in which those types of issues are getting reported by customers and not being caught, and also the impact and the customer satisfaction and experience. I want to get there, but I want to also make sure we spend a little bit more time sort of level setting on the problem, because I think it's sort of an interesting area that can be easily sort of overlooked and neglected, because you have development and engineering teams and IT teams as well, right? Internally looking at infrastructure stacks. And they have dial time, right? Where it's like, I'm going to look at the dials and sort of get a sense of how are things performing. And if the dashboard looks green, I feel good, right? Like everything looks good. Let's go run and start doing things. And to your point, it's getting more complex. Things are moving faster. Things are going to break. Sometimes the dashboard's not going to be green anymore.
Yeah.
But that's sort of that view, as opposed to an engineer, a developer, even someone in IT. They're looking at that dashboard. They're not necessarily seeing what are customers experiencing? What are they reporting? It's not really in their view. It's not in their frame of reference.
Correct. And that's kind of a trend that we've seen lately, where not too long ago, the customer experience was just the domain of customer support or customer service, or maybe the customer success managers. That problem, and I'll let you know why that is a problem. That issue, right, has now moved up the stack and it's at the CEO table, right? The reason to that is because companies can actually correlate a poor customer experience with retention and even new ARR for those customers, right? It has become a new currency that sits, that we measure. It's a KPI that affects directly the ARR. The other aspect of it is that because of that growing complexity, that customer experience also has an exponential cost to the organization, which is the other big driver that moves everything in the organization. Hey, are we making more money? Is this impacting my ARR, or is this impacting the bottom line of my P&L? Is this creating or generating more costs, right? So the trend we've seen in a lot of organizations is the increase the service ownership from an engineering perspective. So as you were saying, everything that we're monitoring is now an accountability to the service owner, right? Everything that goes wrong or the impact of an incident to that business KPI, which is the ARR, or the cost, it is part of that service ownership model, right? So we see more and more the engineers, on-call engineers, care about those metrics, not only like, hey, this is my thing is great, or I'm deploying this many changes in production per day or per month or per week, whatever that metric is, but how is this affecting the effective big numbers at that CEO level, right? The ARR and the cost of the organization. And it's important to minimize both, right? So to understand how the impact to your customers, right? We run critical workloads for our customers. A minute down might mean for some of these customers in some times of the year, we just come back from Black Fridays and Cyber Mondays, etc. Holiday season for some of the big retail. Every time of the year for some of the big telco is critical time for them. And anything that is part of their critical workload ecosystem having issues can mean a lot of money a lot of cost for those organizations, right? So how do you respond to that? How you add those metrics to the engineering across the rest of the organization? Again, it's not only engineering, customer experience, it's every interaction you have with the customer is going to affect that customer experience. Mm-hmm. The engineering, putting code in production has a real impact in how customers are going to be affected, right? So that's kind of where the trend is going and where we are kind of moving as well here at PagerDuty.
Okay. And that's a great segue, because I want to now sort of look at inside PagerDuty in your role, right? Leading, customer support and success inside PagerDuty. PagerDuty's been on this journey for a while, so there isn't kind of a, hey, we weren't paying any attention to this and suddenly we woke up and decided to. It's always kind of been there, but what has that journey looked like? Where did things kind of start? And how did this sort of view of, sure, you've got your DORA metrics, your lead time to change and your mean time to resolution, those have been kind of well established out there. But this view of how do we add in what's going on with customers, what's the impact on customers, and what's the cost associated with anything that's going to be disruptive to customers? How did we get started on that?
Excellent question. So here again, this is the main reason why PagerDuty exists in the first place, right? So this idea of mobilizing the right people at the right time is where PagerDuty is coming from. We want to see the evolution of that, or that improvement of the customer experience as a gradual journey towards that common goal of, again, unrealistically the zero in errors, but the improvements on the responsiveness from all the ecosystem. There are several areas where you want to be. So out of the full incident lifecycle, right? So there's an impact of some sort, whether that is that comes to your organization through any alerting or directly reported by a customer. There is that's the start of an incident journey, right? The incident management starts with kind of an alert, a symptom, if you wish, that is telling you that something is off. It might be a big symptom, or it might be a customer telling you, hey, this is not working for me right now, which is kind of the out of the incoming sources of an incident, probably the worst case scenario, because that's what takes probably you longer to resolve, understand what's going on, because it has bypassed all the monitoring you have set already. So there's no way to, you need to be able to track that down and address a miss, rather than knowing there might be something wrong and you can react to just the alert. Or it might just be the alert, right? So out of those different stages, you want to start focusing on what makes more sense depending on what the numbers of those stages. If you have too many alerts, you want to start kind of analyzing whether all of those alerts become effective incidents, right? And you're mobilizing people every time there's an alert or every time there's a real incident. Some of these alerts might be coming from different sources and might be symptoms of the same issue, right? You want to treat the issue as a single one rather than have every single alert driving a particular issue. So there's some level of grouping, there's some level of analysis that you can do at that level, so you kind of reduce the noise to signal ratio right there. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you want to have a good setup. So when something like this happens, right, again, we talk about it, it will happen, you're mobilizing the right people. The right people meaning the right service owners, but also the right amount of people. There's only that many bodies you can throw at a problem, right? We've talked to some customers that are mobilizing hundreds of engineers every time there's an incident. So that setup, that fine-tuning, that granularity of who is able or capable of providing a resolution to an incident out of every different engineering team, that correlation of the incident happening and the service that is causing it, or that correlation of even before that happens, that becomes an incident. How do you provide context to the incident so you also reduce the amount of time that those engineers that are resolving the incident need to spend in trying to figure out things like how many customers are affected, or what services are up or down, or things like has this happened before?
Mm-hmm.
And do we have some sort of historic context that can help us resolve those incidents faster, right? So depending on your configuration, you want to start focusing on what makes more sense, what is the best value for your buck. If you're investing time in resolving any of those stages, what's what you're going to get there. But think about it, like, you never finish with it. Like, it's just that journey. It's like, automation, you can automate so many things, you never finish. It's that journey. Same here, is how do you get better and have a good sense of how you set your priorities, right, in that full incident life cycle. Finally, I missed it in the stages. There is a component of it, which is how you learn from the incident. That's the called the postmortem of the incident review, the root cause analysis, all of those things that actually take a lot of time to create, right? And all that investment in time that's part of a process needs to revert back so that incident doesn't happen again, or something similar doesn't happen again. So the learning experience becomes a set of actions that you're going to put in motion, or you're going to execute on, that improve the overall process, right? And that's how you kind of get better as these incidents happen.
Yeah. So how does it work inside PagerDuty today? Because PagerDuty itself is providing a digital service, and one that we don't take any maintenance windows. So we're continuously delivering new capabilities. To your point, that's a lot of innovation that you're throwing at the system is always potential for disruption. So you're there on the front lines with customers week in and week out. How does PagerDuty do this? How do we solve this internally?
So we are customer zero. We drink our own champagne, or whatever the saying goes. We are customer zero for all the PagerDuty innovation, right? So we like to put our money where our words are, and invest in using our own systems, right? So we have good systems with mechanisms, obviously having been on this world for some time, to the mobilization of the right people, to the point where we might be having, on any incident that we have, just a handful of engineers actually doing the work, plus the 3 core people in the incident commander, scribe, and the customer liaison. So we do invest in improving our own tools by exercising the processes, exercising the tools internally, right? So that's kind of how we are very confident when we go GA with functionality that's announced, we are already using most of it internally. Again, there are some caveats to that, but ideally, the process on paper is that we will go through our own consumption before we actually start there, and we participate at the design level, right? So the problems we're having are no different than the problems any of our customers are having. We do have very similar engineering process. We do have very similar trends, that service ownership that we mentioned. We have very similar interest in investing in the automations and Gen AIs and all those, trending initiatives that are improving all the efficiency. Again, thinking of that cost reduction and that revenue retention from our side. So we do all of that internally. One of the things that we've also invested, this is a little lately, in not as as early as we started off with PagerDuty, but the communication process, that certainty, that predictability in the unpredicting world of an incident, how we communicate internally to our stakeholders. It's common that someone in operation is getting pinged or called by unlimited number of executives in the account. What is going on right now? What they're trying to fix it, right? And that is a problem in itself. But also providing through tools like status pages the information in a timely and ordered fashion to those customers that are waiting on an incident to be resolved, right? So those improvements are critical on both kind of the reduction of the people who really need to work during that incident in the process, but also that communication both internally and to our customers on where are we. Customers want to know we're on it, right? Customers want to know there is progress, and customers want to know if they are affected or they are not affected, right? So status page has been a critical part of the stack that we use internally, and obviously we provide that service to our customers too, but it's been critical to improve that customer experience. Again, the incident still happens. It might even be reported by one of these customers, but they know that within 5 minutes, we're going to assess the impact. And they know that within 15 minutes or every 15 minutes, we're going to be communicating to them on what is the latest update, how are we progressing on the resolution, right? Because they will need to report up to their stakeholders as well. And once again, that predictability on the reporting and what is expected from us, them knowing, creates a much better customer experience in a bad situation.
Yeah. So as customers are calling in, filing tickets, omnichannel engagement, they're getting the benefit of internally what's effectively a lot of communication protocols that have been put in place in order to make sure that any of those signals kind of coming back to your life cycle of an incident, those signals coming in from a customer go somewhere. What I often hear when I'm talking to folks, just out in the field and in the industry is when I ask them, it's like, well, we've established it's a non-zero amount of time. We all agree. Now the next question is, what do you do? What happens? Where do those go? And some of the common ones I often hear are they file a ticket. And so it's the customer support team is filing a ticket somewhere. And then, the next set of questions around that is like, okay, well, then who's looking at that? And how does that get to the right teams? And what's the time frame that ticket is sitting there in a queue waiting to get processed? Maybe that's fine for some of the things that a customer calls in about, but maybe it's not. Or the other one is, well, we have like an email alias. And so we just send everything into an email alias, which maybe is just filing a ticket on the other end.
And those two things are against any accountability, right? So that trend, again, the service ownership, that's what becomes critical here. Moving that ticket time operation to a real-time operation in the organization and engineering organization, it's a shift in the mindset of that engineering organization that needs to happen, right? And it goes hand in hand with that service ownership, right? Hey, this is you're responsible for that code. It might be that that code is not being used by a customer because they can't right now at this very same moment. That is your responsibility in a way, right? Or there might be a change that might have broken something, and that is your responsibility to fix. Our responsibility as a company, but it has to go end to end, and we need to extend those service level agreements that are usually referred to in the context of that support and response times, etc. Need to scale through the rest of the organization as well, right? So if we need to mobilize the people to resolve a customer's problem, that's what we need to do. We just need to be prepared and ready to have that structure. So when that happens, we again call the right people, get them on the call, provide them with enough context so their resolution goes faster. And as I said, going back to stage one, where okay, what went wrong? What do we need to do so this doesn't happen again? And we don't push that interruption to engineerings that don't need to be interrupted, right? So that is kind of what the sweet spot is. But yeah, even today, that the email aliases and the kind of throwing a ticket out there, see if someone is gonna get it, take it, or when. We do negotiate internal agreements with our engineering organization, and we do have this mechanism to have them as part of that response team, right, to our customers with the same speed and the same intent that the customer support has, right? At the end of the day, it's an extension of us into the engineering world. We are an extension of engineering into the customer world. That's how we manage to make it work better.
Are there any things that you learned that, because I can imagine some organizations may struggle to kind of navigate that negotiation, right? Which is always a tough thing in different organizations. You get silos for a reason, and then you have teams that they're like, well, we're responsible for shipping the code, and we do all the tests and we watch all the monitors, and that's what we're accountable for. And now you're trying to tell me that I need to answer to this other thing as well. Isn't that your job? Is there anything you've sort of seen that works well for how does that negotiation get simpler?
It is part of that same evolution of that service ownership. It doesn't. At the end of the day, we all need to understand that the work doesn't disappear, right? So even if it's a ticket, and you take that ticket a month later, right? That work is exactly the same work, right? So you're just delaying that work, and the priority is part of that kind of the customer experience being moved at the CEO desk has driven all that change in the organization, right? There is strong correlation of bad customer experience with losing of ARR. That is important for every organization in this crisis, no crisis state that we are for a couple of years now. Mm-hmm. It becomes critical, right? Because every dollar for any organization is going to count. And there is an intent, again, a mandate coming from the CEO office that this is something we need to pay attention to. But yeah, it's that trade-off, right? The other thing is, if you're set up correctly, this doesn't necessarily need to be an interruption, right? When you have people on call set up to do this in particular, right? When you have time allocation at all the engineering in all the engineering teams to actually respond to these type of things, this is kind of expected. It's kind of embedded in the work that engineering is doing and product is doing. And while it doesn't, it takes a few cycles to get that. But I think the willingness of engineering to have their code, to have their features being successfully used by customers, that pride of my features being used, it also plays on behalf of this change, right? So while you might think there's some resistance and some pushback, the reality is that once explaining that customer experience is just not the front end. It's just not the go-to-market teams talking to a customer. Is how the customer interacts with the product as well. Then it becomes kind of we have this value in our company run together. But the run together is the best example of that is when engineering and go-to-market come hand in hand to solve a customer's problem, right? At the time the issue's happening. Right?
Yeah, and I think you make a great point that the work hasn't gone anywhere. It maybe has just been deferred, and it's while it's been languishing, it's accrued additional costs.
Correct.
Right? You have incurred some interest payments on that in the time between when you first learned about it, your organization, and when you've actually addressed the issue. So that I think that's an interesting point. In addition to, hey, you've got top-down mandates that come in around this just needs to be like customer experience needs to be better. Everyone is on the hook for it. But then also that there's this, hey, if you're doing this the right way, it's not going to be as disruptive and noisy as you think it is. And that kind of leads into a question I want to come back to, which is around learnings. But before we go there, I want to just see if you have any like sort of win stories to share where you're just like, hey, we had this moment, super proud of it. And, it was a step along the journey or, a particular moment that just sort of stands out to you that you can share.
So there's a few, again, things tend to break on weekends, which is, we have probably a very large, the largest, but very large database of incidents in the world, right? 30% of those incidents happen on a weekend, right? They happen from Friday 4 to Sunday, whatever time, right? Because again, it's the maintenance window, usually, not always, but usually that's where, most users are off and maintenance windows, and you kind of upgrade things and whatnot, right? And we all make mistakes, and there's this one time where customer deleted users out of a script that was put in production once again, and we were able to get all of those users, restore all of those users through engineering processes within hours, right? That very same process saved the full weekend to a team of 4 or 5 people trying to replace or recreate the existing users' escalation policies, schedules, and whatnot to be able to be operational by Sunday. They had a big event on Sunday. We were able to help them out through running that very same process that it's already set up, right? So the beauty of it is that we didn't have to go through exceptions or an exceptional process to help a big customer or small customer, it didn't matter, but to help a customer out because someone made a mistake. We're all humans. So the sense that we can effectively help out, we can give people time back by running a process is actually quite cool, right? When you think about it, like you save someone's weekend, right? With a process that is not costing you any money because there's no exception. This is something we already were running. We were ready to do something like that. We are ready to execute on something like that for our customers. That story, it's not a story particularly for us, but I'm pretty sure that person is telling the story internally in that organization that we help, right? So that's kind of where the giving time back is always a good thing, right?
Yeah. So let's come back to that learnings question, sort of that at the end of the incident cycle from you start with that signal and then you're working through and giving time back. But at the end of the day, something did happen. Something broke somewhere. And how do we get better over time?
Yeah. So part of the, I've seen postmortems or incident reviews that are 30 pages long, right? So it's a very thorough analysis of what happened, why it happened, and what are we doing, which is to me the most interesting part. Like everything's interesting, right? Like the process is checking the process runs smoothly, and if we need to add any controls or approvals into that process, that will show there. But effectively, like, how did this bypass our existing monitoring? What are we doing so this doesn't happen again? Those are the best practices. Here at PagerDuty, we have an engineering process to that. Like every customer reported issue is going to trigger what we call a PCO action, right? So within the week, we will have a monitor that will prevent that very same incident from happening again, right? That's kind of what like how you get the number of customer incidents down. Is you react to those learnings. This is just one of the action that always has to be there for every single, doesn't matter the priority, every single incident that is customer reported will trigger at a minimum the creation of a monitor to prevent that incident from being, not from happening again, ideally from happening again, but from being reported from a customer again, right? So that's kind of the learning there. But overall, it also helped us improve our engineering processes with things like emergency breaks, right? If there are dependencies to certain integrations, we might decide to stop. Like we're committing to certain SLA, we're committing to certain uptime, we're committing to certain deliverability of our notifications. We might want to stop changes from going into production to take a pause and understand what's going on. If there's something we need to do better. It's like a code freeze for specific services. We do it obviously over the holidays and whatnot. So we run zero risk. But those implementations of best practices in engineering are strategies when you roll out fast rollbacks on every commit, increasing the number of tests that you have in your commits, or better kind of peer-to-peer testing. All of those things are just initiatives that came out of these types of incidents, right? When you look them at scale and you start to see trends like, hey, this is what's happening, some of these dependencies are breaking things more than others, how do we go about it? And we take those initiatives seriously.
Yeah, all your classic site reliability engineering practices, right? With, learning from those incidents, having those established SLOs that support the SLA that you have with your customer, but that giving you that error budget to understand how are we doing this month, right? So that you can then make decisions, data-driven decisions in real time. And what I'm hearing you describe is that customer support, customer service is part of how those site reliability engineering practices get fully adopted, because they're participating in the incident postmortem in order to provide insight into when and how the issues are reported by customers, part of the fix that happened, and therefore part of how are we going to prevent this from happening again, this particular thing, as best we can, so that we're only dealing hopefully with novel incidents, or at a minimum that we're not hearing about this from a customer because we've at least put the monitoring in place to catch this in the future.
The other interesting aspect, again, this is also a little bit aspirational, right? We're heading towards that. This is application of Gen AI. So the correlation of how we've solved some of these issues and the symptoms that we see, to move that customer experience from a reacting, which is a traditional way, you open a ticket and then you get a response, pure reactive, into more of a preventative up that maturity curve, right? Where you're going to be seeing the symptoms. It's not even an alert, right? But you might want to run that very same play that resolves an incident in the last month, right? With similar symptoms. You want to run some of those diagnostics before you actually get into any sort of incident, right? Just to kind of proactively check out of symptoms, just pure symptoms, whether, or try to anticipate whether an incident can be coming right soon. And that, again, having that very large database of incidents, and obviously taking all the security steps and guidance. How do we move? The best incident is the one that doesn't happen. How do we move that customer experience to that place where, hey, listen, you were about to have an incident, right? But we fixed this, we did that, we whatever, right? Or we even allow our customers to read through that database of incidents and say, hey, this is what we see, or you see in your monitoring, in your alert, before it actually becomes an incident, and this is how you've solved those incidents, putting those places in automation mode, right? So the incident doesn't happen, right? That prevention is an interesting topic as well. Again, Gen AI automation in the customer service doesn't necessarily need to be after the incident happens. It can be in that very early stage of the incident life cycle, even before the incident is a thing, right?
Yeah. Well, I just want to squeeze in one last question before we wrap up, to ask if there's any other kind of nuggets of wisdom that you want to share with the audience around, from PagerDuty's own internal experience with closing, the sort of the natural gap that can exist between customer service and support, IT, engineering, and development. Anything you want to leave people with?
I would say kind of the enjoy the journey, right? Part of it, every little improvement counts, right? We don't necessarily need to strive for the big impacting initiative that is going to resolve everything, right? But there are the automation mindset. I've been doing automation for some time, right? So the automation mindset is, if I have to do this 2 times, then I better automate it, even if it's just a minor task. It starts with a single engineer participating in an incident that thinks about, how can I get this better, faster to my colleagues? How can I reduce 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 3 minutes of an incident by providing that context, and take it as those little initiatives, one at a time, that will add up to an impacting kind of result, or a much better outcome. But don't try to boil the ocean, right? That would be my advice. Just think about the one thing you do twice that you'd rather not be doing, that is taking you those 5 minutes of your time that are having a customer waiting for 5 minutes. Maybe you can do it in 10 seconds. Maybe you can provide that up front. Maybe you don't need even to do it when the incident is happening. How do we think and start instilling that mindset of, let's automate, let's provide the context before actually, we're gonna, once again, we're gonna end up doing it during the incident. How do we make that kind of a fact? Like, hey, this is all the context, all the stuff that you're gonna need to work, all the data that you're gonna need to work on this incident. It's already here. Now let's talk about making the decisions, right? If you can automate all the way to the resolution, the better. But more often than not, you're gonna be able to make decisions faster when you don't need to go fetch any of that information. Just one little step at a time works as well, right?
Yeah, and that's a great segue, honestly, to where we're gonna be exploring next week around platform engineering, that automation mindset of picking every piece that is showing up more than once, more than twice, and finding a way to wire that in to how all teams are going to do it, not just the team that detected it the first time. Now you're really kind of actually getting into kind of a platform story. So perfect setup. Thank you, Arturo, for next week. And then we'll be back after that with Todd Whitney talking about doing things like updates without a maintenance window. Whether you have maintenance windows or not, it's always better if you can reduce the impact of that. And so I think he's got some great insights. And then we'll be back in the new year with Manu Gurudatta going from slipping to shipping. So thanks, everyone. Thank you, Arturo, and have an uneventful
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.